Namaskar. 43 years back, in today's 43 years back on today's date, Indira Gandhi and her Congress announced the emergency. Thousands of people were jailed and lakhs and crores of Indians lost their freedom again. In fact, they were deprived of their human rights and all human rights in India were suspended. I have with me Mr. Seshadri Chari, an eminent thinker, political commentator, author, and most importantly, sir, you were jailed during emergency.
Yes.
Do you remember that day, sir?
It was much later at the, in 2007, it was 1976. Sometime around November 1976 that I was arrested.
Do you remember that day? Anything about that day?
No, actually what had happened was we were organizing Satyagraha against emergency. And the Satyagraha was started on 1976, 14th November. It was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's birthday. So that was the day chosen to start the Satyagraha.
Achha, achha.
His commitment to parliamentary democracy and his daughter has suspended parliamentary democracy. He was a Democrat and his daughter turned out to be the worst enemy of democracy in India. So that was the day it was chosen. And then before that I was part of the Loka Sangarsha Samiti. During emergency the RSS was banned. So in order to look after the underground activities, the RSS had formulated an organization called Loka Sangarsha Samiti. So under LSS, we were all working.
Sir, tell me, what caused emergency according to you?
See, I think it was the Allahabad High Court judgment. We all know about this background. So after the judgment, she went to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not give her much relief.
Just for my viewers, I want to just say, Allahabad High Court had passed a judgment that Mrs. Gandhi cannot enter into the parliament for 6 years. They had banned Mrs. Gandhi from entering into the parliament for 6 years, entering into Indian politics for 6 years. That is
there was elections were held, and Rajnath Singh against Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Raj Narayan had contested, and he filed a case against her. And Jagmohan Lal Sinha, who was the judge of Allahabad High Court, he upheld that and he accused her of moral turpitude to that extent that for 6 years she cannot contest any election. Her election was set aside. Correct. And for the next 6 years she cannot contest election. But she went to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also, it stayed that judgment, but it said you can be an MP, but you cannot preside over any parliamentary meeting. Practically she was not the Prime Minister.
Correct.
And then there was a tremendous resentment within the party, clamoring for her resignation, and they said, you set aside, you be aside, you choose another leader, and after you go to the Supreme Court, you win the case, you become the Prime Minister again. But she had to, she was virtually being forced to quit as the Prime Minister. That was the situation. Her cabinet was not with her. In fact, if you read the letter that she wrote to the President of India on that day when emergency was declared, the copy of that letter should be made available to the public by some manner. The letter specifically says that I do not have the time to go through the requirement of going to the cabinet. I would have liked to have taken this to cabinet for, but unfortunately that is not possible tonight. I am therefore condoning and permitting a departure from the Government of India rules as amended up to date by virtue of my powers under Rule 12 thereof. She used her personal power as the Prime Minister under Rule 12 of not going to her own cabinet because the case was very clear that the cabinet would have never approved it. That was the fear that she had. So you can imagine, and she said, as already explained to you a little while ago, information that has reached us which indicates that there is an imminent danger to the security of India being threatened by internal disturbance.
What was that internal disturbance she was referring to?
There was no internal disturbance. Emergency can be declared for two reasons. One is internal disturbance or external threat. There was no external threat and there was no internal disturbance.
I mean, why did the president then sanction it?
Because the president was a rubber stamp president and she had told him that you have to do this. Where was the solution to all that? So those who are accusing BJP of using governor now should hang their heads in shame.
Because Congress had used earlier on.
Not
so
only
BJP
said,
is
not
using it
only
now.
said, she said, I want the president to do this. So she wrote a letter to him, she phoned him, she told him, I am sending this, you sign and send it back to me. So the president, it needs a presidential proclamation, which was not permitted, which was not discussed in the cabinet because it was not presented in the cabinet. And then she wrote in that letter that I will take the presidential proclamation to the cabinet next day. And then the next day, emergency was declared. And then the next day, the presidential proclamation was put to the cabinet. And the cabinet quietly did it. We do not even know whether the cabinet really met or not. But nothing is known because on that day itself, all newspapers were closed. Electricity connection to all the newspapers in Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg and elsewhere also were all cut, and immediate censorship was announced. So censorship, the next day, number of papers had to come out without an editorial. Some of the papers gave a blank editorial, some of them put a black, printed black mark on the space of the editorial, but later on all those papers were told that you cannot bring out a paper with blank editorial. You have to write something and you have to support the emergency. Terrific censorship was. I mean, people who have not lived through the emergency cannot even imagine what kind of censorship was there. Terrific censorship was there. INB minister was VC Shukla at that time.
Yeah,
You can imagine the kind of censorship. It was not only on the print media, it was also on the films.
Sir, what caused emergency? What really caused emergency?
The emergency was brought in because Mrs. Indira Gandhi was unseated.
Is that it?
She wanted to protect her own seat.
That's all. If it wasn't the Congress party, like you are saying, it wasn't the Congress party that actually initiated emergency. It was Mrs. Gandhi's personal decision. Mm-hmm. And if not, who supported Mrs. Gandhi?
See, basically what happened was, later on, of course, the party fell in line because she had practically put everybody from the party, her own party, forget other opposition leaders, but people from her own party like Chandrasekhar, Mohan Dharia and so many other people.
I.K. Gujral.
I.K. Gujral was not in jail, but he was told to either keep quiet, fall in line, keep quiet, or get lost, or go to jail. So that was the situation. He wrote an article I was the editor of Organizer in 1992. So after that, I.K. Gujral wrote an article after 1977, he wrote an article against emergency at that time.
In Organizer?
In Organizer, yeah. He wrote an article in Organizer at that time. Although he was not from Jansangh that way. So you can imagine the kind of fear that was put in the minds of people. So forget others. Even the congressmen were told that we are all subject to emergency, you are all subject to censorship. Nobody should oppose emergency. So many congressmen were sidelined. And she wanted political support. So the only kind of people who came to her support was the CPI. So Comrade Dange went very close to Indira Gandhi at that time, immediately after the announcement of emergency, because Comrade Dange and CPI saw emergency as a golden opportunity to take over the Congress, to enter the Congress and then virtually control the Congress. And at that time, in fact, before that, Mohan Kumaramangalam, who was a communist, had detailedly written an article, and that article was called the Trojan Horse Theory. How the same old Trojan horse idea, how the communists should en masse enter the Congress and take over the Congress. The moment emergency was announced, the CPI saw it as a golden opportunity. Fortunately for the CPI and unfortunately for the communist movement, Mrs. Indira Gandhi had jailed a number of CPM people
Correct,
also.
which is what my next question would
Correct.
be. Yeah.
Because the CPM was also jailed. CPM also was against the emergency, in fact. So since CPM was also in the jail, CPI was the only party outside, so they moved very close to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and they used to in those days we used to mock at Comrade Dange. Dange was written as DANGE, and Congress at that time was called Congress R, that is ruling Congress. So they used to write Congress within bracket R. So we used to write Dange within bracket R, danger. Red is danger.
So Chariji, you are saying that possibly the only party that supported Congress at that point in time, or rather supported Mrs. Gandhi at that point in time, was
CPI.
Dange. Congress themselves were not willing to support
Absolutely
Mrs. Gandhi.
not.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Emergency was declared by Mrs. Indira Gandhi to protect her personal position as Prime Minister, and emergency was supported by the communist CPI only to get closer to the Congress and then virtually take over the government administration.
Okay. Chariji, let me go one step further. Emergency happened, Mrs. Gandhi was thrown out, and came in the Janata Party. The Janata Party couldn't rule for 5 years. What went wrong? Why did people, assuming so much of torture happened, human rights were violated, all of this happened? Why did India go back to Mrs. Gandhi? Why did India go back to to Congress I?
See, even in 1977, Mrs. Indira Gandhi lost. And she knew that she is going to lose the elections. Because almost 6-7 months before the elections, after the elections were announced, during the run-up to the elections, she realized that she has made a big mistake. And she saw the power of RSS. So she suddenly decided to change the strategy. The strategy that she changed was, she sent one of a top emissary of the Congress to another RSS leader who was working for the RSS but underground. I can even tell you the name. His name was Bapurao Moge. Bapurao Moge was stationed in Delhi at that time, and he was practically looking after the underground movement. Dattopant Thengdi and Bapurao Moge were totally looking after the underground movement at that time. So Indira Gandhi had established contacts with both Bapurao Moge and Dattopant Thengdi. But Dattopant Thengdi decided that I will not talk to anybody from the Congress. Now the elections have been announced. Now it is an open warfare. Let us fight. So millions of Swayamsevaks were working for Janata Party. And Mrs. Indira Gandhi realized that if RSS starts working for Janata Party, they have already started working, so nothing can happen. So she sent an emissary to Bapurao Moge with a olive branch saying, I will lift the ban on RSS. I will not release political leaders, but RSS ban I will lift conditionally, on a condition that the moment your ban is lifted, you should declare that no RSS people will work for the Janata Party. The RSS refused.
Sir, my history is slightly different. What I have learned is during the emergency, Balasaheb Deoras sent a letter to Mrs. Gandhi where categorically it is written that, listen, we are willing to support a national movement. We are willing to support your 20-point program, the 20-point program which she had by then presented to the country. Okay, and saying that, listen, we are kind of, we are the same, we all feel good that there is a national
As far as the country
benefit.
is concerned.
No, sir, also in the same breath, he said that he is happy. In fact, he starts his letter by saying that I am happy that the Supreme Court has reinstated you as a Prime Minister. That's how he starts the letter. What was that about?
Many congressmen at that time, they had very good connections with RSS, especially Mr. Yashwantrao Chavan, who was the Chief Minister of Maharashtra at that time. And Balasaheb Devraj was kept in Pune, Eroda jail. And number of Congress people came and told Mrs. Gandhi also that it was a mistake to ban the RSS. Because the congressmen felt that a good number of congressmen were being totally marginalized.
But sir, sorry.
So what happened was, the only person to whom they can go and retrieve the situation was the RSS. So many of them felt that it would be a good way to approach the RSS.
But sir,
At the same time,
it was not sounding like this. I'll tell you, if you look at the situation, there's one more question and then you can please continue. Balasaheb Devraj also wrote a letter to Vinoba Bhave saying, look, sir, that we understand that the Prime Minister is going to visit you. During our visit, kindly let her know that we are good people and, please lift our ban. Okay, and also, if you can, kindly help us to fix up a meeting with her so that we can have an audience with her. Correct. Sir, why would a person who is so popular, who like you say, if Congress wanted to join RSS, Congress wanted to promote RSS and all of that, why would a person write like that?
See,
these are factual documents.
No, the main issue at that time within the Congress and to a very large extent within those who were thinking about Sangh also was that emergency was taking India back into a kind of one party, one person dictatorship, which was the hallmark of communist countries like Russia, China. This was the situation. So India was being compared with Russia. India was turning into a China, which was a fearful thing, absolutely fearful thing. You do not know what these communists could have done. They could have got the entire opposition in the jails killed also. Anything could have happened, and then there would have been a very bloody revolution in the country.
So are you saying Balasaheb Devraj wanted to write?
Balasaheb Devraj, of course, see, RSS got all this information from outside, inside the jails also. And then RSS was approached. RSS also thought that there must be a dialogue with the Prime Minister. As long as the Supreme Court, it may be a sham Supreme Court, but as long as Supreme Court has said that you can continue to be the Prime Minister, then she is the Prime Minister of the country, and if she has committed a mistake, that should be corrected. So the most important element in that correction was to establish a contact with the Prime Minister.
Sir, you are telling me that Mr. Balasaheb Devraj wrote to Vinoba Bhave asking him to explain it to the Prime Minister that, Sangh is not that bad an organization. You can please lift our ban. Please convince Mrs. This is what they said. Please convince Mrs. Gandhi to lift the ban on us. It's purely to go and explain to Mrs. Gandhi later point in time that you should not listen to the communists.
Vinoba was against emergency. Not many people know this. You are forgetting one thing. Vinoba Bhave, as a Maharashtrian who was a Gandhian, had established a ashram in Wardha. And the connection between Vinoba Bhave and the RSS goes back to 1935-1940. It was not a connection which was established in 1975.
The letter also says that. The letter also, the fondness in which is written.
And Vinoba was very, very close to a number of people from the Jansangh also at that time, and even the RSS also. So Vinoba was really troubled. He did not want this kind of an emergency to continue. In fact, he had criticized the emergency. When all these things reached Mrs. Indira Gandhi, there was tremendous censorship. So what I'm saying, there are a number of documents that are made available after 1977. So all those documents are there already. In fact, an entire story about emergency will have to be rewritten on the other hand. So Vinoba, when he spoke against emergency, he was told that you better don't speak about emergency. So Mrs. Indira Gandhi went and met him. When Mrs.
She
Indira
was doing
Gandhi,
a sampark for Samarthan.
absolutely, for Samarthan she said, for Samarthan for emergency. What transpired between them is known to very few people, but those who were insiders point blank said that Vinoba Bhave very point blank said that what you are doing is wrong. So lift the emergency. You are the Prime Minister, you continue to be the Prime Minister, but don't do these things. What you are doing is wrong. A, emergency is wrong. B, suspension of personal rights, human fundamental right is wrong. 3, your hobnobbing with communist is absolutely wrong. He said all these things. Vinoba was a great admirer of Gandhi, but he was a very great critic of, remember he was a critic of Nehru. So, in fact, in one of the discussions, he was asked about discovery of India. So, Vinoba Bhave's comment was, it is not discovery of India, it is masquerie of India. This was the idea that he had. Anyway, different. I am not getting into that things. So, this is what transpired. When she came out, she declared that Vinoba ji has said that she has appreciated the attempts to bring in discipline in the country, and he has called emergency as Anushasan Parva. So this word Anushasan Parva was coined by Mrs. Indira Gandhi and put in the words of Vinoba Bhave. This is what has happened actually. And there were people within the Sangh who were outside or were in the jail, knew all these things. But the Sangh tried its level best to approach Mrs. Indira Gandhi and tell her that what you are doing is wrong. This is highly detrimental for the interest of the nation.
Sir, fair enough. So I'll take your word as it's, because by the letter it was sounding as if Balasaheb Devras was pretty desperate to meet Mrs. Gandhi, and more importantly, he was more desperate because he wanted the ban to be lifted.
If the desperation was there, much later, when Mrs. Gandhi realized her folly, the only way for her was to either continue the emergency as it is, which was impossible because there was tremendous resentment against emergency from our own party. That was one. Or second thing was, she knew that she has lost the plot already.
Okay, fair enough, sir. So let's move ahead from here. We go by what you're saying. You're saying two things you said in the last 10 minutes. One is that communist was the only possible party that supported Congress, or rather that supported Mrs. Gandhi. Even before possibly the Congress party could support Mrs. Gandhi, communists came and supported Mrs. Gandhi. And another thing that you're saying is they wanted to infiltrate into Congress and probably
not only that the political class was against, there were a number of other people from other walks of life. For example, the entire spectrum of censorship fell not only on the print media but also on the visual media. In those days, there were no mobile, there was not much of television also. So the only other medium was the film industry. So I mean, one of these days you should get the copies of these papers. Devanand wrote an article in India Today. Pran was the first person who wrote an article against emergency. Of course, after emergency, of course, he wrote in Screen magazine. I don't know if that magazine is still there. So people like Devanand, Pran, Vijayanand, Daini Densongpa, R.C. Kumar, Atmaram, G.P. Sippi, Shatrughan Sinha was also a very big star in those days.
But he never wrote any article, I presume.
I don't know whether he wrote an article, but this entire film industry was up and against emergency and the censorship.
Right.
So they all wrote against emergency. But you can imagine the kind of resentment that this community had. The community of professionals, the community of advocates, they were not allowed to go to court. They were not allowed to take up cases against people who were suffering from emergency. And in fact, one of the well-known stars in those days was Karnataka, was from, her name was Snehalata Reddy. Snehalata Reddy was arrested, she was tortured in jail. If you read Madhu Dandavate's book, Madhu Dandavate clearly says they were in the same jail, and Madhu Dandavate says, I used to hear shrieks, some shoutings from Snehalata Reddy's room at night. She was tortured. She was woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and begged. And she died. She was released on 15th January 1977. She was released.
And 5 days she passed
And
away.
after 5 days she died. In fact, she died because of
Sure.
chronic
Sir,
asthma.
sir, I'll have to
So
take a
this
break.
is the kind
Yeah.
of torture, and this is the kind of atrocities that have been committed during emergency.
In the next segment, I would like to have asked Chariji, can today's BJP take credit for fighting emergency? Catch you back.
हर साल भारतीय जनता पार्टी और राष्ट्रीय स्वयंसेवक संघ 25 जून को देश भर में आपातकाल को लेकर शोर मचाता है। पर आपातकाल से जुड़े कई तथ्य इससे ज्यादा उजागर नहीं किए जाते। कम ही लोगों को पता होगा कि आपातकाल के दौरान आरएसएस ने तत्कालीन प्रधानमंत्री इंदिरा गांधी से कुछ मुद्दों पर समझौता किया था। आखिर ऐसी क्या बात थी कि संघ परिवार को तब की कांग्रेस की प्रमुख इंदिरा से समझौता करने की नौबत आ गई।